This week we have quite the synergy of readings. All three are tied up into a nice little bow. James and John came to Jesus today and say, Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask of you. This is right after Jesus has predicted his death for the third time. They're basically saying, okay, Jesus, we get it, you're about to die. When you die, can we have all your stuff? When Matthew was writing his gospel account, he was so embarrassed by this instance of James and John that he tried to back it away from them a little bit. He says, it wasn't James and John whose idea was to come to Jesus to ask this horrible question. It was their mother. She was the one, the mastermind behind all of this. Not James and John, not the disciples. Their mother. Poor mom. It's rather insensitive on their part. But Jesus rolls with it. He says, are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am to be baptized? And they said, of course we're able to. That sounds easy enough. Yes, we want that. A little history on what James and John are neglecting to take into account of this cup. The cup Jesus refers to is an Old Testament image for God's judgment. We see this cup referred to in Isaiah and Jeremiah, referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. See, in the prophets, God is letting them know ahead of time that he is going to punish them for their sins. He is going to raise up the Babylonians to destroy Jerusalem and carry the Jews off into exile, away from the comforts of home, away from the ability to worship God. If they wanted another God so bad, he says to them, God is going to pull his protection away from them and allow them to taste what they think they want. And especially in Jeremiah, who witnesses this cup of wrath firsthand as the Babylonians take Jerusalem. He is there in the midst of this cup that James and John so flippantly refer to. It is felt most emphatically by Jeremiah. If you want to know his first-hand account, read the book of Lamentations. God's wrath is indeed poured out on Israel, his servant. And this is actually the initial level of what we know as the suffering servant songs. We most often hear them when we're during Lent, when we're preparing for the crucifixion of Christ. And we, as Christians, associate them with Jesus. But that's not the level that they were initially written on. The initial level of these servant songs, this servant is Israel, receiving the wrath of God's cup being poured out. But they could not hold up if God had not stopped Israel's sin, had not stopped. Israel's sins were being visited upon them. The sins of all the generations prior to the one experiencing the wrath are visited upon them. But God had to stop. They could not even stand up to God's wrath against them, and they only were receiving a taste of it. The exiled generation bore the sins of the whole. They were beaten and dragged off for their sins. Yet, as we know, as Christians, there is another level, a deeper level to this prophecy as well. Israel was only paying for the sins of Israel. And for this, they got a taste of the full wrath. And then when they paid their dues in exile, God restored them. In Jesus, on this deeper level, he takes on the iniquity of all humanity. He does this by becoming one of us. As God, there is no knowledge of the temptation of sin. God is perfect. He's never tempted to sin because it's abhorrent to him So there's not that understanding that we humans have on what it means to be tempted by sin. But that's true until the incarnation. When Jesus becomes incarnate, he becomes fully human, fully capable of sinning. So he knows exactly what it is like to be tempted to sin. In fact, I would say he knows what it's like to be tempted to sin better than any of us do, because he feels the full weight of that temptation, because at some point we would always give in to temptation and commit the sin. Hebrews says Jesus is like us when in every respect, yet without sin. He feels the full weight of that temptation. And he takes on in his humanity the full cup of wrath on behalf of all humanity. Not just the sins of his fathers, or even just the sins of Israel, but all the sins of all humanity for all time. That he could take the punishment instead of us. In Matthew, there's an image that I just learned the full weight of in Matthew 23. Just after Jesus confronts the Pharisees with a list of woes for their hardness of heart, Jesus says to them, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not." I always imagine this image is getting in out of the rain, or for warmth, or something like that. But the way Jesus is using it here, it is as if a fire is running through the chicken coop, and the mother hen holds out her arms, and her brood comes in under her, and she closes around over them, so that she takes the weight of the fire. She takes the death that should be theirs, and that they may go free. This is what he's saying when he's saying to Jerusalem, "How often I would have gathered you in as a mother hen gathers her brood, so that I could take this punishment for you, but you would not." This is Jesus lamenting that the Pharisees and those like them refuse, because of their pride, to enter the shadow of his wings as he drinks the cup of wrath on their behalf. This is what Jesus is referring to when he talks about the cup that he must drink. And James and John will indeed drink of this cup that Jesus drinks, but only by entering into his death through baptism. Only by being incorporated into the body of Christ are they able to drink the cup which he turns into a cup of salvation. There's one more time the cup of wrath is mentioned in John's revelation, and is concerning those not marked in the blood of the Lamb, those made to drink the full cup of God's anger. And why? Because they would not allow Jesus to drink it on their behalf. So there are two cups, one of salvation, one of wrath. And then let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need as we go to the altar and drink the cup of salvation. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.